In the dry desert of southern Peru, huge lines and drawings cover the ground. Some look like animals. Others are long, straight paths or giant shapes scratched into the earth. For years, people have wondered why the Nazca people made them. Were they linked to the stars? Were they messages to the gods? Or were they something even stranger? The truth is probably much simpler and much more human. The best explanation is that the Nazca lines were used for religious rituals, especially ceremonies connected to water. In a place where water meant survival, these lines may have been part of prayers, processions, and sacred acts. The Nazca lines are giant drawings on the desert floor in Peru. They were made by moving away the dark surface stones to reveal the lighter ground beneath. That simple method created strong shapes and lines that could be seen from nearby hills, and much later, from the air. Some are pictures of animals, such as a hummingbird, a monkey, and a spider. Others are straight lines, triangles, and wide trapezoid shapes. The reason they lasted so long is the climate. The desert is so dry and still that the lines were not easily washed away or covered over. The Nazca lines were made by the Nazca people, who lived in this part of Peru about 2,000 years ago. They lived in a hard environment where water was always a major concern. This was not a rich green land. It was a dry coastal desert, and farming only worked if people could find and manage water carefully. Because of that, water was not just practical, it was also spiritual. In many ancient societies, the things people depended on most became part of religion, and the Nazca were no different. To understand the lines, we have to understand their world first. A world shaped by drought, survival, farming, ceremony, and a deep respect for the forces of nature. Over the years, many ideas have been offered to explain the Nazca lines. One of the most popular said they were linked to astronomy, like a giant calendar or map of the stars. Another claimed they were roads or markers for travel. And of course, the wildest theory said they were landing strips for aliens. These ideas became famous because the lines look so strange and so large. But being famous is not the same as being true. Most archaeologists no longer accept the alien idea at all, and the astronomy theory has also lost support because the evidence is too weak to explain the whole site. Today, the strongest explanation is much more grounded in Nazca religion and daily life. The most believable explanation is that the Nazca lines were part of religious rituals. Many researchers believe these lines were sacred spaces where people walked, gathered, and performed ceremonies. Those rituals were likely connected to water, fertility, and the gods, or sacred powers the Nazca believed controlled nature. The idea fits both the land and the culture. The Nazca lived in a place where rain was rare and water meant life. It makes sense that they created large ceremonial paths and symbols as part of prayers and public rituals, asking for water and good harvests. This does not make the lines less impressive. It makes them more real and more human. The first major piece of evidence is the setting itself. The Nazca people lived in one of the driest regions in the world. In a place like that, water is everything. It decides whether crops grow, whether communities survive, and whether the future feels secure. When something is that important, it often becomes part of religion. That is exactly what many researchers believe happened here. The lines were not random art made for fun. They were likely tied to ceremonies focused on rain, fertility, and survival. The dry land helps explain why the Nazca would spend so much time and labor making giant designs in the desert in the first place. Another strong piece of evidence is the shape of the lines themselves. Many of them are long, straight paths or wide trapezoid spaces that seem made for movement. They do not all look like pictures meant only to be seen from the sky. Some look more like places where groups of people could walk in a set direction or gather during a ceremony. That matters because it supports the idea of ritual use. Researchers have argued that these were not just images, but pathways. In other words, the Nazca lines may have been something people used with their bodies, not just something they made to be looked at from far away. A third reason this explanation is so strong is that the lines seem connected to the wider, sacred landscape around them. Some researchers found links between the lines, nearby hills or mountains, and places associated with water. In Andean belief, mountains were often seen as powerful sacred places because they were tied to rain and water sources. So the lines may not have just pointed across empty land. They may have connected people to places they believed had spiritual power. That makes the Nazca lines easier to understand. They were likely part of a bigger religious map built into the land itself, where nature, survival, and worship were all tied together. The ritual theory also becomes stronger when we look at nearby ceremonial sites, especially Cahuachi. This was an important Nazca religious center, and it shows that the people who made the lines already had a strong tradition of public ceremony and sacred gathering. That matters because it places the lines inside a real religious world, not as a separate mystery with no context. The Nazca were clearly building places for ritual activity, and the lines fit into that pattern. Instead of treating them like a puzzle dropped from nowhere, it makes more sense to see them as one part of a larger ceremonial landscape. New discoveries have made the picture even more interesting. In 2024, researchers reported 303 newly identified figurative geoglyphs near Nazca. That matters because it shows the area was even more crowded with symbols and designs than experts once thought. It also suggests the Nazca landscape was used in more complex ways over time. Some of the newly studied figures seem different from the larger famous ones, which may mean not every geoglyph had the exact same role. But the new findings still support the bigger idea that this was an active human ritual landscape, not a one-time project without a clear purpose. One important thing to remember is that most plausible does not mean only possible use. The Nazca lines were made over a long period of time, and there are many different kinds of shapes across a huge area. So it is reasonable to think that some lines had slightly different uses from others, but that does not weaken the main argument. It actually makes it stronger. Large ritual landscapes often serve more than one purpose at the same time. Some lines may have been used for walking ceremonies, some as symbols, and some as markers linked to sacred places. The central idea still holds. Ritual use fits best. So what is the most plausible explanation for the Nazca lines? Not aliens, not a giant airport, and probably not a giant star chart either. The strongest answer is that the Nazca people made these lines for religious rituals, especially ones tied to water, fertility, and the sacred power of the landscape around them. The proof is not based on one clue alone. It comes from the desert environment, the design of the lines, their connection to sacred places, and the wider ceremonial world of the Nazca culture. The mystery is still fascinating, but it is no longer impossible to understand. The Nazca lines make the most sense when we see them as human, spiritual, and purposeful. And maybe that is what makes the Nazca lines so powerful. They do not need aliens or fantasy to be amazing. The real story is already incredible. An ancient people living in a brutal desert, creating giant sacred designs as part of their struggle to survive and make sense of the world around them. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the ritual explanation fully solves the mystery? Or do you think there is still more to uncover? If you want more deep but clear history videos like this one, subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next episode.